Hello and welcome to a discussion of Daniel Deronda by George Eliot, which was the second novel I read for the Chunksters Reading Challenge and which I began reading on the 23rd of January 2020 and which is 805 pages long. Daniel Deronda was George Eliot's final novel, and it follows the intertwining lives of the beautiful but spoiled and selfish Gwendolen Harleth and the selfless yet alienated Daniel Deronda as they search for personal and vocational fulfillment and sympathetic relationship. Set largely in the degenerate English aristocratic society of the 1860s, Daniel Deronda charts their search for meaningful lives against a background of imperialism, the oppression of women, and racial and religious prejudice. Gwendolen's attempts to escape a sadistic relationship and atone for past actions catalyze her friendship with Deronda, while his search for origins leads him, via Judaism, to a quest for moral growth. Eliot's radical dual narrative is complex and intellectually challenging and raises all kinds of doubts and controversies in the mind. Gwendolen Harleth gambles her happiness when she marries an unyielding and self-willed aristocrat for his money. Beautiful, neurotic and self-centered, Gwendolen feels that she is trapped in an increasingly destructive relationship, and only her chance encounter with the idealistic Deronda seems to offer the hope of a brighter future. Deronda is searching for a vocation, and in embracing the Jewish cause he finds one that is both visionary and life-changing. Damaged by their past and alienated from the society around them, they must both discover the values that will give their lives meaning. George Eliot's powerful novel is set in a Britain whose ruling class is decadent and materialistic, its power likely to be threatened by a politically emergent Germany. The novel's exploration of sexuality, guilt and the will to power anticipates later developments in fiction, and its linking of the personal and the political in a context of social and economic crisis gives it a special relevance to the dominant issues of the 21st century. Gwendolen Harleth is a beautiful but rather vain and somewhat spoiled young woman who meets the handsome, thoughtful Daniel Deronda whilst they are both abroad. Daniel is attracted to the lovely Gwendolen, and when she loses practically all her money at the roulette table and is forced to pawn her necklace, he ensures her jewellery is returned to her. However, Daniel's affections have already been engaged by someone hugely different to the rather shallow Gwendolen, namely a young and very pretty Jewess called Myra, whom Daniel saved from a suicide attempt and whose family he is trying to locate for her. When Gwendolen discovers that her family has lost all of their money, she returns home to England and marries the wealthy Grandcourt, despite being made aware that his past conduct leaves much to be desired, feeling that she will be able to manage him. Grandcourt, however, is an experienced and domineering individual, and one who is more than a match for his young wife. Meanwhile, in his search for Myra's mother and brother, Daniel finds himself inexorably drawn towards a Jewish family, and in particular a friend of theirs, a very spiritual but seriously ill man named Mordecai, who soon begins to play a significant part in Daniel's life and in Daniel's search for his own origins. The novel, however, is not just a story of romantic and familial love, but also an examination of Judaism and of the situation of Jews in the late 19th century. Daniel Deronda was George Eliot's final and also her most controversial novel, and one where the author reveals her interest in Zionism and where her fascination with the religious rituals and the culture of those of the Jewish faith is made evident. The characters are very well portrayed, with a potent mixture of the good, the bad and the ugly, and amongst other aspects of the story, it was particularly interesting to see the way Gwendolyn's character evolved through the course of the novel. So, what did I think of this novel? I didn't enjoy this in quite the same way as I enjoyed Middlemarch, and I wouldn't recommend this novel to those who have not yet read any George Eliot. The storyline involving Gwendolyn Harleth is a fascinating psychological study of a young woman brought up in luxury who has to face the prospect of poverty and of demeaning herself, in her opinion, by becoming a governess. Almost against her own desires, she engages herself to Grandcourt to avoid having to go out as a governess and to prevent her mother and sisters from sinking into an impoverished lifestyle. I found this storyline to be compelling, convincing and satisfying. The storyline involving Deronda and Myra and Deronda and Mordecai I found less interesting and thus less enjoyable. When Eliot is describing character and incidents, then she is superb and her prose fairly sings. But when she drifts off into detailed philosophizing to emphasize the seriousness of her subject, then her prose becomes dense and often impenetrable. This slows the novel down and impedes the narrative flow. I could quite happily have done without either Myra or Mordecai in the novel. I appreciate that others may find these characters and the philosophizing fascinating, but a 400-page novel involving Gwendolyn, Grandcourt and to a lesser extent Deronda would have been a much more satisfying novel for me. If Eliot wanted to explore Judaism, then I feel that she could have separated the text into two books, a novel of 400 pages, i.e. a work of imaginative fiction, and a 400-page non-fiction work of philosophy and theology, using her research to explore the subject of Judaism, which so fascinated her, but which in this novel I found less than thrilling. However, even in those sections that I found were more demanding on me as a reader, Eliot's skills and power as a writer are self-evident. So, my rating for this novel is A for Gwendolyn, Grandcourt and Deronda, and C for Deronda, Myra and Mordecai. But as it is impossible to separate the two stories, I'll have to give it an overall rating of B. And now that I have read it, I have donated £10 to Book Aid International. And now here's a quick recap, and I'll be back soon with another BookTube video.